Hey, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
I'm Brenda J.
And I'm Karen Wonder.
And we are
HangingOnToHope.org. This podcast is intended as educational and is not psychological or medical advice. Always consult a professional when needed, and we disclaim any liability in connection with the instruction, information, or advice given.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Hanging On to Hope podcast. This is Brenda J. Today we have Sherry Gaba and Carla Romo on the podcast. Sherry's the host of the Love Fix podcast and is a psychotherapist. Sherry is the go-to expert alongside Dr. Drew Pinsky on VH1's #1 Celebrity Rehab, or have seen her on Access Live, the Bio channel, or Showbiz Tonight talking about her best-selling book, Love Smack, How to Stop the Cycle of Relationship Addiction and Codependency to Find Everlasting Love. Her co-host Carla is a renowned dating and relationship coach. Carla is the author of Contagious Love and an international speaker. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you so much.
Well, hi, ladies. This is Karen. Nice to meet you.
Hi,
nice
Karen.
to meet you too.
Yeah. So would you mind sharing a little of your story and how it led up to becoming a psychotherapist and eventually the podcast and the book?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I started out working with addiction. I was married to an alcoholic and I ended up on the show Celebrity Rehab, which is all about addiction. And well, it was a rehab where celebrities were getting sober. And so that morphed into another book I wrote. And eventually I realized I was so focused on the addict alcoholic, that's codependency. So I turned it all around and said, I really want to help people like myself who have been obsessed with an alcoholic, obsessed with an addict, obsessed with a narcissist. So basically my second book was morphed into being just that, helping women with codependency, toxic relationships, and putting the focus back on them instead of the addict or narcissist.
Yeah, we only did one podcast on narcissism, so maybe we'll have to do something else more on that down the road.
Cover that definitely more because there's a lot of complexity to that.
Well, hi, Carla. What's your story and how did you end up being a dating and relationship coach?
Yeah, that's a funny story. Everyone's always like, okay, tell me, how does one become a dating and relationship coach? So as I always like to say, I grew up with domestic violence. My father was abusive when I was a little girl. And, my parents divorced when I was very young, but that really left a huge imprint for my codependency to really kickstart and fire up. And I just always felt like I wasn't enough or I wasn't worthy and I needed and sought out validation and relationships, even at a very young age. And I talk a lot about that in my book, Contagious Love. And I found myself in this really unhealthy, abusive relationship at 24. And I just saw two paths in front of me. And I thought, gosh, I can continue this cycle of dysfunction and picking partners, who are unhealthy for me and recognizing this is now a choice. Or I can stop the cycle and I can really learn to love myself. And as I like to say, begin the most important relationship that I will ever have, which is the relationship with myself. And from there, I decided to end that relationship. And as I like to say, I begun the most important relationship, which is with me. And I filled up my own damn cup and learned really about loving myself and taking care of myself. And at the time I had a career working in television and Hollywood and codependent with that working relationship as well. And I realized while I was getting healthy and having boundaries in my own life, that this other career didn't really fulfill much for me and didn't give me much purpose. So I thought, other people are struggling in this area. And that's how I became a dating and relationship coach. I thought I want to help other people. And then from there, Sherry and I were able to meet and that's how we created the Love Fix podcast and where we're at today.
Well, I love your story because I can relate to that because I've been divorced probably 6 or 7 years and I didn't date for like the first 5 years because I went through mending the soul and I just did all kinds of counseling. And so I just love what you're saying there because I think it's so important to work on yourself to understand why you make the choices you do and recognize all that. Because I do feel like I'm in a better place now. But I just really applaud you for what you're doing because I think it's very needed. So the first thing we wanted to talk about today was people pleasing. I'm definitely a recovering people pleaser and I've struggled with it my whole life. And I know a lot of people do. Can you explain to our listeners, Sherry, what is people pleasing, what exactly that is and the root cause?
So it is one of the main components of codependency, right? We want to appease and we want to people please. We want to turn ourselves into a pretzel to make someone want us. And where does that begin? So being the psychotherapist here, it usually starts with some kind of early trauma where you were either neglected, abandoned, parents weren't available, they weren't emotionally available, physically available. Perhaps you were a parentified child where your parents treated you like a little adult because they were actually, to be honest, they were very immature, or they just couldn't handle the responsibilities of being a mother or a father. So they would put it, on their kids. And so that develops what we call a fawn response. When you look at trauma, you can have a fight response, a flight response, a freeze response, or a fawn response. And the fawn response is the people-pleasing response. And it's developed because you want to be seen. You want to get attention. You want to be validated. You want to be known. You want to be acknowledged because you didn't get that growing up. So what happens is you get into these adult relationships and suddenly you'll, like I said, you'll turn yourself into a pretzel to make someone want to be with you, love you, validate you, know you. And it generally doesn't work because you end up settling for less because you'll do anything for that attention. And the people pleasing, you're going to be taken advantage of most likely. Carla, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's really, comprehensive around it. And I think the other thing too is that, people pleasing is a way of manipulation, which people don't really look at that way. But because people think of, the abuser is a manipulator. But when you are codependent, you are manipulating because you need to feel safe. You need to feel okay. And in order to do that, you need to make sure the others around you see you a certain way and are okay.
Like you feel like you can't be authentic and people pleaser. Yeah.
Well, in other words, when my alcoholic ex was drinking and was out there, I thought I could save him. And so I did everything I could to please him. I put him in rehab. I paid for it. I didn't divorce him right away. I just basically did whatever I could because I thought I had all this power and I was trying to please him to get him well. Other people pleasing are these toxic relationships we talk about where, someone really doesn't accept us and they're very critical of us, but we turn ourselves upside down to get that attention, which I call people pleasing. So you're right. At that point, we aren't being our authentic self.
Yeah.
We're trying to do everything to make them happy so they won't get mad at us. They won't get angry. They won't leave us or abandon us.
Yeah.
I never thought of it as being manipulative.
Yeah, that's an insight to think about because that's what I'm striving for. I'm in a new dating relationship right now. And I'm like, I don't want to fall into that. It's just a regular pattern with me that comes like just natural to me. So it's triggering to be like, okay, how do I be authentic? Because it feels like a safe and healthy relationship. But this has always been my tendency is to be a people pleaser. So,
well, if you feel secure in the relationship, you probably don't feel the need to people please. But if someone is throwing you a bone or not giving you what you need, and
that makes
sense. Manipulation comes in when I will do anything for you because I'm so freaking scared that you will leave me. You won't want to date me anymore. You don't want me. So then you change your whole persona for them. And that is manipulation.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. And I was a people pleaser in denial. I wouldn't admit it for a long time.
I think everyone is to some degree, but it's that self-awareness.
So Carla, the podcast is about healing and educating about abuse so our listeners can understand why the same patterns keep repeating. Do you think people pleasers are easily manipulated?
Absolutely. Yes. Because they're the people that fall right into manipulation in the sense that they're looking to do anything and everything to get the approval of someone else. And abusers can sense that and recognize that, especially if you're looking at people who are narcissists or psychopaths. And right there, they can sense it, that this person is easy to kind of maneuver and they have this power control dynamic going on. And I always say that the power dynamic around abusers is an illusion. And I don't want to say it's an illusion because it is very dangerous to get out of an abusive relationship if it's been physical. It can even be verbal, even if it's been verbal. But sometimes that's Sherry could probably speak on this in the psychological side and the therapy side of things. But, leaving an abusive relationship or an abuser, a lot of times people can die because especially if it's been abusive, the person will try to come back and have the power of them and kill them. So I don't want to sit here and say that it's an illusion and it doesn't exist. However, they like to create the illusion that it exists. And what is the perfect recipe for that is that it is through the manipulation of people pleasers. right? Because then they can kind of just grasp on. It's not as much work for them to get somebody in there. But to be honest, anybody can actually fall victim to being in an abusive relationship, even if you aren't a people pleaser. That's just kind of the hard truth around it. But I would say definitely people pleasers fall prey more than not.
And the whole thing is, if you didn't get your needs met as a child, you don't know anything different. You felt invisible. Nobody really saw you, heard, understood you, acknowledged you. So you're used to being in this role. You're used to being in this trauma fawn response because you always felt invisible. So you don't even know what your preferences are. So you almost act as if, because you really don't have a sense of self. And that's why Carla was talking about most important relationship is with yourself, because if you don't know who you are, and truly, like I know people say, oh, you have to know who you are, you have to love yourself, to love someone else. It really is true. Because if you don't know you, you're going to be taken advantage of and you're going to most likely settle for less.
Yeah, I can totally see that. And I think it is so important to work on yourself and to have that self-awareness.
I agree.
Yeah. So Sherry, I know you struggle with this too, people pleasing, like we've been talking about, and Brenda and I definitely struggle with that. So our question now is, why do people pleasers struggle setting boundaries, and how do we set healthy boundaries? And I know we did a podcast on boundaries, and one thing he said was we have such a fear of like offending someone, and that's hard if you have to set a boundary with someone because you don't want to upset someone else, but then
right. That's the whole thing. If you upset someone might leave you. They might abandon you. They might reject you. They might not want to be with you anymore. So that's why boundaries are so difficult. The other reason is we get defensive, because if someone is verbally abusive or someone is kind of pointing the finger at you when they probably should be pointing the finger at themselves, like they always have to be right and you're always wrong, then you start to get defensive. And defensiveness is kind of a form of people pleasing. Like you don't have to be defensive. One of the things I learned in the 12-step program Al-Anon is no is a full sentence. But often when you are being manipulated, like the manipulation, it goes on both sides. But if you're with someone, like I said, who's verbally abusive and they're very good at manipulating you and gaslighting you and kind of turning things around and almost doing like if you've ever heard of word salad, where they're just like, they're all over the place and you're like, huh? And especially gaslighting, then you're not going to be able to say no, because you kind of question, well, is it a no? Like you second guess yourself. And then of course, going back to the core of you, who you don't know who you are, then that's going to make second guessing even more powerful. That's why saying no is so difficult for a codependent.
Yeah, I was abused. I was physically abused, verbally, spiritually. I don't know if you guys had a chance to listen to my podcast, but I was married to a pastor that started a cult, started sleeping with one of the cult members, just to keep it short. And, I just wasn't even a person anymore. So I 100% agree with you need to know who you are. And sometimes I don't even know what I'm thinking or what I like. So yeah, it's hard.
That's hard even, I think, as you're getting healthier. And because I have friendships that I know that I need to set a boundary, and I've tried setting boundaries, but when a friend maybe doesn't have the self-awareness and is really defensive herself, that's when I know, well, is it time to just ditch the relationship or just keep, it's still a struggle.
And one thing I want to say, I do a lot with ancestral healing or transgenerational trauma, and you have to think about it. This is 2023. And you think about the shame that women have had to deal with for centuries, thousands and thousands of years. So we're just at the tip of empowerment. If you look at the 60s when feminism came about. So it's only been, 40 years or something, 50 years that we actually have a voice. So it wasn't even just, we were abused as children. We had no voice. And this was carried from generation to generation to generation. And the other thing that was carried is I was watching a show called The Beauty Queen of Jerusalem, and it's about Israel before it was Israel and Palestine and so forth. And I noticed, and I'm Jewish, I noticed in the show, and I don't think this is just a quote Jewish thing, I think a lot of religions have this, is that everything had to do with family's honor, your honor of your family. Like you could be miserable, you could be beat, like one of the characters, she's being beat by her husband. And it's like, we don't care. All we care about is the family honor. Right. So you had to take shit just to be able to be in a family. Or a lot of them could just denounce you. So we have to be easy on ourselves. This is layers and layers of shame. That's where it really is rooted in. And then it becomes this people pleasing.
Yeah. Well, after reviewing your material, Sherry, you say people pleasers often stay in relationships even when they know they should leave. They feel like they can save that person. They neglect their own feelings and emotions and place the other person's feelings above theirs, even if it will hurt them. This question is for both of you, but first, Carla, why does a people pleaser have a hard time letting go?
Because it's the innate feeling of wanting to get this person to like them, get them to be happy. And it is an absolutely impossible job to do. I mean, it's literally impossible. You cannot make other people happy. You cannot make other people like you. You cannot make other people see you differently. You have zero control, zero power over it. It's like self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like you want them to love and like you. And you just keep going at it and going at it and going at it, that it almost becomes addicting because you just hold on to hope. You hold on to this idea of what if, the fantasy of what could become, what could be. And other people have to make themselves happy. Other people have to have their own opinions of you. One of my favorite sayings is, it's none of my business what people think about me. Because it's not your business what people think about you. Yeah. And when you're stuck in that mentality that somehow it is your business, then the people pleasing gets activated. So really, to stop the people pleasing, to get out of that cycle is boundaries.
To add to Carla, you have to remember if you're with someone who's probably abusive, and that's why, you're in this people pleasing situation in the first place, a trauma bond forms, and that becomes there's a lot of highs and lows in the relationship. And so you get addicted to the highs and you keep thinking it's going to get better and it's going to get better. And if I'm just nicer and if I just do this and I get my hair done this way and I blow dry my hair right and I look beautiful and I cook the right meal, they'll stay or they will stop being abusive or whatever. So that's why you're addicted to this high and low and you keep hoping it's going to be high and it never is. So you are stuck in this trauma bond and the only way out is no contact.
Yeah, I don't ever want to be in a relationship like that again.
No.
So Sherry's quote earlier sounded so much like our podcast. We did a podcast with Bob Hamp on codependency. How are codependency and people pleasing related? Either one of you want to answer that or both of you?
I think they overlap. I mean, there's many aspects of codependency, wanting validation, wanting to fit in, wanting to be approved, wanting to be acknowledged. And then people pleasing is right there with it. So I would say it's an overlap.
Yeah, I would say it's a symptom of codependency.
Yeah,
if you're people pleasing, you're codependent. That's pretty standard in terms of it. And I don't think a lot of people recognize that as being the same as the bigger picture. It's I'm just a people pleaser. It's yeah, but if you're people pleasing in all your relationships, you're probably codependent too.
Yeah.
And then underneath the codependency could be, not always, but most likely it's a trauma response. So you've had a history of trauma. So it isn't I woke up to be this really super nice person and I want everybody to like me. Yay. It's no, I was not approved by my parents. They weren't around for me. So I'm going to do anything to get love. I mean, that's part of my book. Love Smacked is about love addiction, which also overlaps codependency, but I will do anything to get love because I want to be loved so badly because I didn't get it early on in life. So it's very insidious and nothing to be ashamed of. It comes from trauma. It comes from transgenerational trauma and traumatic relationships.
Yeah, it makes sense that they all kind of go together.
Yeah. Well, now after all this discussion on people pleasing, how do we break free from it? Carla, did you want to start?
Mm-hmm. Get a damn life. That's what I always like to say, but it's kind of true. I'm really big on filling up your own cup, filling up your self-worth and exploring what activities do you like to do? What hobbies, what interests do you have? When you're so focused on yourself, you're no longer focused on other people and focused on yourself in a healthy way, not looking in the mirror. Oh, I don't look good in this, or I need to do X, Y, and Z to my face because then I will be liked better, right? Not that way. I'm looking at it from a holistic approach of what gives me joy? What gives me meaning? What gives me purpose? How do I talk to myself differently when I do look in the mirror? Can I tell myself I love myself? Does it make me cringe? If it does, what's going on there? Really taking that finger that you're pointing at somebody else and pointing it back to yourself. That is the start of really just a beautiful relationship that you can get with yourself. And then from there, when you start to learn, I have needs. Oh, I've been giving all my needs away to these people to make them happy and appease them. But when I put that finger back toward myself, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, I've got needs. I've got wants. What? Okay. Where do I go from here? And it's really building up your self-esteem. It's tapping into self-love. It's it's many different approaches into one. And this is the biggest thing as well. There's no destination. People think of healing like a lot of times as, okay, you're going to go from point A to point B. You'll be done. You'll be good. And life is great. No, you still get triggered. You still have to keep up with your self-love journey. You know, I do. I still keep up with my self-love journey and I still get triggered from time to time. It's not as big at all as it used to be. And that's because I have a foundation that I really live by around my self-love journey. But I, of course, sometimes get triggered or if, but I've got tools now to fall back on because I've built that up and it takes time. It's not a quick fix.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. It is like
this whole podcast is making me think about everything all over again.
We're triggering you. I would say if you
no,
I would say that if you keep getting into these relationships over and over and over again, then there may be something deeper going on. And that's when you want to hire someone like myself, a really good therapist. And you want to work with someone, if it's not me, someone that does trauma therapy. And the next thing I would do, there are 12-step programs that help with codependency. People might want to go visit Carla on my website, thelovefix.com. We have a podcast too called The Love Fix, and we have many episodes on codependency. And then we have many programs to help people in a group setting to heal codependency and toxic relationships, which we know being with other people that have been where you are, at least that's been my greatest healing journey, is knowing that I'm not alone. And so definitely check out The Love Fix. And then, of course, Carla and I have our books that are related to codependency. There's so many great resources out there. I mean, look at our posts on Instagram. What is the Love Fix podcast, Carla?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's our that's our Instagram, or you can go to mine, which is love addict / codependency curious. You can go to Carla. I am Carla Romo. I mean, there's so much great information out there to start the healing process.
Yeah. That's true. And I'm a big believer in the 12 steps too. I've been in several 12-step groups and I'm a big fan of them. I just think they're great because you're just real with other people and you're with people that you can relate to.
Yep.
So on one of your podcasts, Carla, you talk about relationships that are unhealthy and that people are comfortable in the chaos. It's familiar to them. In a sense, you're in denial and not seeing reality. And I can totally relate to that in my marriage and how I just kind of got used to that. And Carla, how can we recognize a healthy relationship when the relationships we've been in have been so unhealthy and toxic?
Man, so getting into a healthy relationship after a toxic relationship can actually feel very uncomfortable because
to be continued. Stay tuned for next week's part 2. You don't want to miss it.
Thanks for tuning in to Hanging On to Hope. Check out our website, hangingontohope.org. There are resources on there, and if you would like to donate or volunteer, you can do that through our website. We are a brand new nonprofit, so we appreciate any and all support. And we thank you for listening. And until next time, keep hanging on to hope. We are evidence that there is hope and healing for you, and our passion is to help you find it too. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening, everyone.